In the fury of the storm, a son and a daughter cast their elderly mother out into the street, leaving her in a wheelchair to die. But as she shivered, thinking it was the end, two powerful shadows emerged from the darkness. It was a Navy SEAL on a run with his combat-hardened K9. What he did next would change her life, and what his dog discovered would uncover a secret so evil it would bring them all to justice. Rain in coastal Florida isn't a gentle mist. It's an assault. A hot, violent squall born far out in the dark Gulf of Mexico had slammed into the Tampa coastline with the rage of a betrayed lover. The wind screamed through the canals, tearing at the manicured hibiscus hedges lining the wealthy avenues. Rain fell in horizontal sheets, turning streets into shallow rivers and blurring the multi-million-dollar views into a watercolor painting left out to bleed. Through the chaos, two figures moved as one. They ran against the wind, their movements disciplined and powerful. The man was Jack Callahan. To look at him was to see a man carved from hardship and duty. He stood 6'2", with broad shoulders and lean hips, a physical specimen built by years of brutal training. Jack was a Navy SEAL, currently on a short, mandatory leave after a deployment that left more scars on his mind than on his body. He ran in storms like this to quiet the noise in his head, to replace complex anxieties with the simple burn in his lungs. The second shadow, running slightly ahead but in perfect sync, was Thor. Thor was a 90-pound Belgian Malinois, a specialized military working dog, and Jack's partner in every sense of the word. His coat was fawn and black, and his intelligent eyes missed nothing. He was not a pet. He was a soldier, and he was devoted to the man running beside him. They were on their usual route, a punishing 10-mile loop through the hills of Bel Air, when Thor came to a dead stop. The dog's halt was absolute. He stopped so fast his back legs nearly skidded out on the wet pavement. A low growl, more a vibration than a sound, rumbled in his chest. Jack stopped instantly. "What is it, buddy?" Jack trusted Thor's instincts more than his own sight. The dog's ears were pricked forward, body rigid, focused not on an animal in the bushes, but on a dark, huddled shape on the sidewalk just yards away. It was in front of one of the largest mansions on the street, a massive contemporary structure of glass and white stone that was currently dark, save for the cold glare of its exterior floodlights. Jack moved slowly, his training kicking in, his eyes scanning the shadows. The shape was small. It was still. As he got closer, the rain lashing his face, his operator's mindset fractured and was replaced by simple, cold shock. It was a person, an elderly woman, exposed and sitting in a manual wheelchair. She was bird-thin, her sparse gray hair plastered to her scalp by the rain. She wore nothing but a paper-thin nightgown, a pale blue cotton thing that offered no protection against the relentless, driving wind. She was trembling violently, her whole body convulsing, her skin a pale, almost blue color in the harsh floodlights. She made no effort to move. She didn't call for help. She just sat there as if awaiting the end, and she was clutching something to her chest. With a desperation that was painful to witness, she was hunched over an old, beat-up digital photo frame, trying to shield it from the rain with her own body and a thin, soaked blanket. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen the worst of humanity in war zones across the globe. But this, in the middle of a wealthy American neighborhood, seemed somehow more obscene. Thor, sensing no threat, relaxed his posture. His protective growl softened to a worried whine. He moved cautiously past Jack and nudged his wet head gently under the woman's trembling hand. The woman flinched, then let out a sigh, her fingers instinctively working into the dog's thick fur. "Oh," she whispered, her voice a reedy rasp. "What a good boy." Jack stripped off his heavy, waterproof running jacket in one fluid motion. He knelt in the puddle in front of her, ignoring the cold water soaking through his knees. The sheer vulnerability in her small face, etched with confusion and fear, hit him harder than any bullet ever had. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deliberately soft, the calm tone he used to de-escalate tense situations. "My name is Jack. This is Thor. Are you hurt?" He gently draped his jacket over her thin shoulders. It dwarfed her, a heavy shield against the storm. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded by a frightening, hazy film. "Cold," she whispered. She said, "They said." Before Jack could ask another question, the heavy oak door of the mansion 20 feet away swung open, spilling warm light onto the drenched lawn. A man in his late 40s appeared, silhouetted in the doorway. He was soft, dressed in expensive silk pajamas and a scowl. This was Richard Vance, her son. "Now what?" he snapped, his voice sharp and irritated. A woman, Cynthia Vance, her daughter, appeared behind him, her face sharp and angry, a phone in her hand. "Oh, for God's sake, Mother. Are you trying to make a scene?" Richard spotted Jack, Thor, and his mother huddled on the sidewalk. His face, instead of showing relief, twisted in annoyance. He stepped out of the door, holding a small canvas bag, and tossed it onto the wet grass several feet from the wheelchair. "Here," Richard yelled over the wind. "Here's your medicine and your clothes." Cynthia leaned out, her voice a shrill complaint. "If you want to keep that worthless piece of junk of Dad's, you can stay out here with it. We're done. We can't take it anymore." They saw Jack, a large, imposing man in his dark running gear, and they saw Thor, who was now on his feet, standing between Jack and the house, holding a subtle but definite protective stance. The sight of the man and the dog seemed to frighten them more than their mother freezing to death. Richard's flash of aggression vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear. He grabbed his sister's arm. "Get inside," he hissed. The heavy oak door slammed shut. Jack stared at the door, his mind struggling to process the scene. He heard the heavy, final click of a deadbolt sliding into place. He looked back at the woman. Her face, which had held a flicker of hope when the door opened, was now utterly broken. A single tear tracked its way down her cheek, mingling with the rain. She wasn't shivering from the cold anymore. She was sobbing, a silent, racking motion. She looked up at Jack, her eyes begging him to understand. "They locked it," she whispered, the words snatched by the wind, but Jack heard them clearly. They really locked the door." Jack looked at the massive, dark house, then back at the small, frail woman clutching a broken picture frame. The noise in his head was gone, replaced by a single, cold clarity. His mission had just changed. He touched her shoulder gently. "My name is Eleanor," she whispered, as if in a daze. Jack nodded, his gaze firm. "Eleanor, you're not staying out here another second." Jack's decision was absolute. No debate, no weighing of options. Just the mission. He picked up the small, wet canvas bag Richard had thrown, his fingers instinctively inventorying the contents through the fabric, a couple of pill bottles. He tucked the bag into his pocket. He turned back to Eleanor. "Eleanor," he said, his voice cutting through the howl of the storm. "We're leaving. I'm going to carry you to my truck. It's warm." She looked at him, her dull eyes struggling to focus. I can't. My chair. I'll get the chair, too." He moved with a beautiful economy of motion that was almost artful. First, he unzipped his jacket, still draped over her, and zipped it back up around her, encasing her small, shivering frame inside the heavy Gore-Tex. He gently took the digital photo frame from her hands. "I'll keep this safe for you." He tucked it inside his shirt, against his skin. Then he bent, one arm sliding under her knees, the other firm against her back. He lifted. She was nearly weightless. Like lifting a bundle of wet leaves. He carried her to his truck, a big, unassuming black Ford F-150, parked 50 yards down the street. Thor, who had been standing guard, moved ahead, clearing the path before leaping gracefully into the extended cab. Jack opened the passenger door, carefully placed Eleanor on the seat, and buckled her in. She sank into the fabric, overwhelmed. He jogged back, folded her wheelchair with a sharp metallic clack, and loaded it into the truck bed. In less than 60 seconds, the entire extraction was complete. Jack slid into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. The engine rumbled to life, and the heater blasted on, pumping warm, life-giving air into the cab. Thor immediately nudged his way to the front, over the console, and rested his heavy head on Eleanor's lap, whining softly. Eleanor, who had been silent, let out a choked sob. Her hand found the dog's head. "Oh, Arthur," she whispered. "It's warm." The drive from the opulent cliffs of Bel Air to the functional military hub of MacDill Air Force Base was a journey between worlds. The rain lashed the windshield, but inside the truck, there was only the steady rhythm of the wipers and the hum of the heater. They arrived at Jack's building, a secure, modern apartment complex favored by military personnel. It wasn't luxurious, but it was a fortress. He pulled into his assigned spot in the underground garage. "Mr. Henderson," Jack nodded to the night guard, a burly man in his 60s named Sal Henderson, ex-Army himself. Seeing Jack carrying an elderly woman while Thor trotted at his side, he just nodded. He knew Jack. He knew not to ask questions, only if help was needed. "Cal," Sal said, his voice gravelly. "Looks like you got your hands full. I'll keep an eye on the lobby." "Thanks, Sal." Jack's apartment was on the 3rd floor. It was exactly what one would expect from a senior operator. Minimalist, clean, and orderly. There was a couch, a coffee table, a single armchair, and a large, high-quality dog bed in the corner. The walls were bare, save for a single framed photo of his unit, the men in it blurred for security. It was the home of a man who was always ready to leave, but who valued precision when he was present. He carried Eleanor inside and gently set her on the dark gray sofa. "You're safe now, Eleanor," he said, cranking up the thermostat. "But we need to get you warm. Hypothermia is a serious risk." He went into the bathroom and came back with a stack of thick towels and a bundle of clothes. He was all business now, his combat medic role emerging. "Eleanor, your clothes are soaked. We have to get them off." He saw the flicker of fear and shame in her eyes. He was respectful, professional. He held up a heavy wool blanket. "I'm going to put this over you. I'll turn my back. You can pass the wet things out. Then I have dry things for you." She nodded, her fingers fumbling. He helped her patiently, his eyes averted, taking the soaking nightgown and handing her his own clothes, a soft gray navy physical training shirt, and a pair of thick fleece pants. They dwarfed her, but they were dry. While she dressed under the blanket, he went to the kitchen, his movements precise. He heated water and made her a cup of tea, adding a large spoonful of honey for sugar and calories. He checked the pill bottles from the bag, one for blood pressure, another a diuretic. When he returned, she was huddled on the couch, lost in the folds of his clothes, looking like a survivor of a shipwreck. Thor was no longer in her lap, but on guard at her feet. "Drink this," Jack ordered gently, offering her the mug. Her hands were shaking too badly to hold it. He set it on the coffee table. I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I'm such a burden. I don't understand why. They're my children." "This isn't your fault," Jack said, his voice firm. "You are not a burden. You are a guest. Drink." He knelt and retrieved the photo frame from inside his shirt, wiping the moisture from it with a towel. He handed it to her. She clutched it like a life raft. "Thank you. It's all I have left of him." She ran a finger over the cracked screen. "It's silly. It doesn't even work anymore. The screen broke when he was sick. But Arthur, my husband, he gave it to me just before. He said it held all our memories." Her eyes welled with tears. "It's just a broken piece of plastic. But it's him." Jack understood. He knew what it meant to hold on to mementos. "I get it," he said. He watched as the warmth from the tea and the emotional exhaustion of the night began to take their toll. Her eyelids grew heavy. "You need to sleep, Eleanor."
I couldn't impose."
"It's not an imposition, it's an order," he said, softening the words with a slight smile. "Rest. Thor and I will stand guard." She finally succumbed, her small body curling on the large couch. Minutes later, she was asleep, the deep, ragged sleep of the utterly exhausted. For a long time, Jack just stood in the quiet of the apartment, listening to the fading storm outside and the soft breathing of the woman on his couch. He felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He gently took the photo frame from her sleeping grasp. He didn't want her to roll over and break it further. He set it in the center of the dark wood coffee table. He turned to go to the kitchen to make a call, to figure out what to do next. He didn't take 2 steps. Thor, who had been lying perfectly still at Eleanor's feet, got up. He walked past Jack, his claws clicking softly on the hardwood floor. He went straight to the coffee table. Jack froze. Thor wasn't sniffing the whole frame. He was specific. His nose pushed past the broken glass screen and went straight to the bottom right corner of the plastic casing. He sniffed once, twice, then he nudged it. Nudge. He looked up at Jack, his ears high, his dark eyes intense. Then he let out a low, soft whine. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a beg for a treat. It was the specific alert behavior Jack had seen dozens of times in training and in the field. It was a find. It was the sound Thor made when he had positively identified something that wasn't supposed to be there. Jack stood frozen, his gaze shifting from his dog to the simple, broken picture frame. He had assumed it was a memento. Thor's alert was telling him it was something else entirely. The apartment was silent, save for the soft, steady breathing of the sleeping woman on the couch and the fading howl of the storm outside. Eleanor was safe for the moment, lost in an exhausted sleep. Jack didn't move. His eyes were locked on Thor, and Thor's were locked on the coffee table. The dog didn't bark, didn't move. He just held his alert posture, a rigid stance, a low whine, and an intense, unwavering focus on the corner of the broken digital frame. This wasn't a guess. This was data. In Jack's world, you trusted your partner. You trusted their training. Thor was trained to detect anomalies, chemical compounds, subtle alterations in electronics, hidden devices. A broken piece of plastic, a simple memento should not be triggering this kind of response. Jack's combat medic brain, which had been focused on hypothermia and shock, switched off. His technical surveillance brain, the one trained to find and neutralize hidden threats, switched on. He moved with quiet, deliberate purpose. He couldn't risk waking Eleanor. Not yet. He didn't know what he was dealing with, and he wouldn't frighten her until he had answers. He pulled his phone from his pocket, switched on the flashlight, and set it on the table, illuminating the frame in a harsh white glare. He knelt, his eyes level with the frame. He looked at the spot Thor was indicating, the bottom right corner. To the naked eye, it was just a piece of scuffed black plastic. Thor nudged his hand, then nudged the frame, more insistent this time. "Here, you idiot. Here." "All right, buddy," Jack whispered, so low it was almost silent. "I see it. I'm on it." He gently picked up the frame. It was light, as expected. He carried it from the living room across the hardwood to his small, neat workspace in the corner of the apartment. It was just a simple desk, but it held his laptop and a meticulously organized precision tool kit. Thor followed, his claws clicking softly, and sat at Jack's feet, his gaze locked on the object in his handler's hands. He was supervising. Jack sat. His first logical thought was a chemical signature. "Is it the battery?" he muttered, running a thumb over the plastic. Thor was trained to detect the unique chemical compounds of lithium batteries, both for fire risk and for locating hidden electronics. Maybe the broken frame had a leaking battery, and that was all. But Thor's alert seemed more intense than a simple leak. Jack picked up his precision screwdriver set, the kit he used to maintain his rifle optics and communication gear. He examined the frame's casing. It was held together by 4 tiny screws on the back. He had them out in seconds, his movements economical. The back panel came off. Inside was the simple, unimpressive circuitry of an old, cheap electronic device, a green circuit board, a couple of ribbon cables, and a space where the battery pack should have been. It was empty. The frame was well and truly dead. He looked at the corner Thor had indicated. There was nothing there, just the hollow plastic of the shell. He flipped the shell over. He looked at the outside of that same corner. Nothing. He was about to dismiss it when Thor whined again, this time with a note of frustration. The dog nudged Jack's knee, then pointed his nose at the frame in his hand. "Look again," the nudge said. Thor's nose touched the edge of the casing, right on the seam where the front and back pieces of plastic joined. Jack's focus narrowed. He ran his fingernail along the seam. It was smooth, smooth, smooth. And then, right at that corner, he felt it. A tiny ridge. It was almost imperceptible. Maybe a smear of glue. He brought the flashlight closer, his eyes scanning every millimeter of plastic. And then he saw it. It wasn't a factory seam. The 2 halves of the plastic shell were designed to clip together, but at this one spot, there was a tiny crack, a separation that had been filled with something. It was a seal, a deliberate, non-factory seal. His heart rate picked up. This wasn't a bad battery. This was a modification. "What did you do, Arthur?" Jack whispered, thinking of the man Eleanor had mentioned. His tools changed. He put down the screwdriver and picked up a thin metal pry tool designed for opening phone cases. He wasn't fixing anymore. He was investigating. He slipped the thin edge of the tool into the tiny crack. He was careful, applying steady pressure. He didn't want to break it. He wanted to open it. There was resistance. Then a faint tearing sound as a hidden layer of glue gave way. Then a soft click. The corner of the frame popped open. It wasn't a part of the main shell, it was a small, independent cap, disguised to look like the rest of the frame. And underneath it, where there should have been solid plastic, was a small, hollowed-out cavity. Jack tilted the frame and something fell out into his palm. It was a small object, no bigger than his thumbnail, wrapped tightly and methodically in black electrical tape. He stared at it. His mind, trained to see threats, raced. Was it a tracker? A listening device? He looked at Thor. The dog, seeing the object in Jack's hand, let out a soft huff of air. His job was done. He sat down, posture relaxed, and waited. Jack carefully, methodically began to unwrap the tape. The adhesive was old, but the tape was high quality. It came off in a single, long strip. Inside the black wrapping was a final layer of protection, a small folded piece of plastic wrap to protect the contents from moisture, and inside that, was a micro SD card. Jack's blood ran cold. He stared at the tiny sliver of blue plastic. He looked at the sleeping, innocent woman on his couch who thought she was holding on to a broken memento. He looked at his dog, who had just found a needle in a haystack. This changed everything. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a simple tragic story of ungrateful children. Eleanor had said her husband, Arthur, was an engineer. This was an engineer's work. It was smart. It was hidden. It was desperate. This wasn't a memento. It was a message. And Jack, by complete chance, was the first one to receive it. He sat back in his chair, the weight of the tiny card heavy in his hand. He was the guardian of a secret now, and he had a terrifying feeling he knew what kind of secret it was. The first light of morning was a pale gray smear against the apartment window. The storm had passed, leaving a world that felt washed clean and quiet. Jack hadn't slept. He'd spent the hours in his armchair, the small black SD card sitting heavy on the table beside him. He'd watched Eleanor sleep, her small form almost lost in the cushions, and he'd watched Thor, who had taken up a quiet vigil, at the foot of the couch. Jack was a man of action, not of waiting. But he knew this next step was a minefield. He was trained to fight men with guns, not to show a grieving widow that her children were monsters. He got up as the sun began to cast weak shadows, and started a pot of coffee, the familiar smell a small comfort in the heavy silence. Eleanor stirred, her eyes fluttering open. There was a moment of terrifying, complete disorientation. Her eyes darted around the unfamiliar, minimalist room. "Oh," she gasped, her hand going to her chest.
You're safe," Jack said, his voice calm and steady.
He was standing in the small kitchenette, a solid, reassuring presence. "You're in my apartment in Tampa. I'm Jack. Do you remember the storm?" The memories flooded back and her face crumpled. "Yes, the storm. They locked the door." "I know," Jack said. He walked over and handed her a glass of water, then poured himself a coffee. "Thor and I are going to get you some breakfast. But first, Eleanor, we need to talk." She looked up at him, her eyes still puffy from the night before. "Talk." Jack took the armchair opposite her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. He placed the tiny SD card on the coffee table between them. "Thor, he's a very special dog," Jack began, choosing his words carefully. "He's not just my partner. He's trained to find things that are hidden. Explosives, electronics, things that aren't supposed to be there." Eleanor looked from Jack to the dog, who sat at attention watching her. "Last night," Jack continued, "while you were asleep, Thor kept alerting on the picture frame. He was insistent. He knew there was something inside." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "Inside?" "I'm trained in sensitive electronics," Jack said, a partial truth. "I checked. I found a hidden compartment. Eleanor, your husband. Arthur. He hid this inside." He tapped the SD card. Her confusion was absolute. "Arthur? Goodness, he was an engineer, you know, always tinkering, always hiding his little projects from me." A sad smile touched her lips. "It's probably just, I don't know, the schematics for his model trains."
I don't understand."
"I don't think it's schematics," Jack said gently. "It's a memory card. It's full of audio and video files. I haven't looked at them. I waited for you. I believe Arthur left this for you to find." "But why?" she whispered. "That's what we need to find out, together." Jack retrieved his laptop. It wasn't a sleek silver notebook. It was a tough book, a heavy, military-grade computer in a black magnesium shell built to survive a war. He sat on the floor, placing it on the coffee table. He powered it on. The screen glowed, and he slipped the tiny card into a slot on the side. The file directory popped up. Eleanor leaned forward, her hands twisting in the fabric of the fleece pants. The screen was full. Dozens and dozens of files, all named by date and time. Odd_08_14_2100. Vid_08_14_2115. Odd_08_15_0900. He was recording, she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "In the hospital. At home. It looks that way," Jack said. "The last files. They're dated just 2 days before. Before you said he passed." "Play one," she whispered. Play 1 from the middle." Jack clicked on a file. It was audio. They heard the sterile sounds of a hospital room, the beep of a monitor. A new, cheerful voice came on. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. Time for your blood pressure." It was a nurse. They heard Arthur's voice, weak but kind. "Thank you, Maria. You are a ray of sunshine." Eleanor let out a small sob. "That's Maria, his nurse. She was so kind. They fired her. Cynthia said she was stealing." Jack's jaw tightened. "Let's check the last file," he said, his voice low. His cursor hovered over the file marked odd_final. He clicked it. Silence, then a rustling sound. Then voices, whispered close to the microphone. It was Cynthia. Is he asleep? A deeper voice. Richard. He's drugged. It's fine. Richard, we have to do this now. That new nurse is asking questions. That goody two-shoes Maria was getting suspicious. Cynthia, just up the pain meds. The ones in the vial. The hospice nurse will just think he's being made comfortable. It's what people do. Cynthia, fine. I agree. But I have the papers here. We need his signature. What if he can't hold the pen? Richard, he doesn't have to. I spoke to the lawyer. He just needs to make a mark. A thumbprint is enough if his hand is shaky. We can help him. The audio file ended. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the whirring of the laptop's fan. Eleanor wasn't breathing. She was staring at the laptop, her face a chalky, dead white. She looked as if she had turned to stone. Eleanor, Jack said, his voice low. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. There's a video file, she said, her voice an empty whisper. Vid_final. Eleanor, you don't have to watch this. Play it. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. Jack clicked on the file. The video was blurry, shaky. The angle was low, as if the camera was set on a bed rail or a nightstand, partially obscured by a box of tissues. The video showed the bed. It showed a thin, gaunt Arthur, his eyes half closed. He was drowsy but not asleep. Richard and Cynthia came into frame. They were not angry. They were not sad. They were busy, efficient. Okay, Dad. Cynthia's voice was gentle. The same voice from the audio file. We just need you to sign this. It's just paperwork for the house. She held a clipboard. She tried to place a pen in Arthur's hand. His fingers were too weak. It fell. He can't do it, Richard hissed, his irritation clear. The thumbprint, Cynthia said, her voice hard. She took Arthur's hand, which was limp. She opened a small ink pad. She pressed his thumb into it, then guided his hand down to the bottom of the paper on the clipboard. Arthur moaned, a weak sound of protest. Eleanor. Cynthia pressed his thumb down hard. She held it there. Done, she said, pulling the clipboard away. The video file ended. Eleanor Vance made a sound. A low, guttural, retching sound from deep in her throat. She doubled over, her body convulsing, and vomited violently, bringing up the tea and honey from the night before onto the hardwood floor. Jack was at her side in an instant, but he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on the screen, on the image of the two children. He felt no pity. He felt no compassion. He felt the familiar, cold, precise rage of a man who has just identified his target. He reached over and closed the laptop. The final click of the lid echoed in the silent, sunlit room. The sound of Eleanor's distress echoed in the small, silent apartment, sharp and raw. Jack was at her side instantly, his hands steady, supporting her as she bent over. He was unfazed by the physical reality of her sickness. His medical training saw it as just another symptom. He helped her lean back, his face a mask of calm. It's okay. You're okay. I've got you. But she wasn't okay. She was trembling, her entire body racked with a violence far deeper than the previous night's chill. Her eyes were wide, staring at the closed laptop's dark screen as if she could still see the video playing. They killed him, she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a realization, a final, horrifying truth crashing down in her mind. My children, they killed their father. Jack didn't speak. He got up, fetched a towel and cleaning supplies from the kitchen, and with a few efficient, practical movements, cleaned the floor. He was a man of action. Chaos, whether on a battlefield or in a living room, was something to be managed. He disposed of the mess, washed his hands, and returned with a fresh glass of water. Drink this, he said. She took it, her hands shaking so badly the water sloshed. He steadied her hands with his own. Eleanor, listen to me. What you just saw, it's not just evidence. It's a weapon. Your husband, Arthur, he gave it to you. He gave it to us. Us? She whispered, her voice lost. He left it for someone to find. And we found it. Jack looked at the small, shattered woman on his couch. He could breach a fortress under fire. He could survive for days in hostile territory. He could fight men twice his size. But this was a fight he didn't know how to wage. This was not a world of force. It was a world of paperwork, of judges and lawyers. He was out of his depth, and he knew it. He needed a different kind of operator. He needed a weapon of his own. He pulled out his phone. He had only one number in his contacts for this kind of situation. He got up and moved into the kitchen, keeping his voice low. But Eleanor could still hear the controlled intensity. "Sarah," he said, "it's Jack Callahan." A pause. "I have a situation, a civilian. It's non-standard and it's bad." Another pause as he listened. No. Not like that. I'm at my apartment in Tampa. I need you here, now. It's life and death." And he glanced at the laptop. "Death." He hung up. "She's on her way," he said to Eleanor, who hadn't moved. "Her name is Sarah Jensen. She's a lawyer. She's the best." Sarah Jensen took less than 30 minutes. She arrived not with the hesitant knock of a guest, but with a sharp, confident rap on the door. Jack opened it. Sarah Jensen was not a comforter. She was a weapon. She was a woman in her late 30s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight, professional bun. She wore a perfectly tailored black blazer over a simple white shirt, and she carried a heavy leather briefcase that looked like it, too, had seen combat. She was former Navy JAG, and now ran her own private firm in downtown Tampa, specializing in high-stakes financial fraud and complex litigation. Her sharp, intelligent eyes swept the room in a practiced motion. They assessed Jack, tense, focused, the apartment, minimalist, clean, orderly. Thor, to whom she gave a nod, acknowledging a fellow professional. And finally, Eleanor, small, terrified, broken. "Callahan," she said, her voice crisp. "You said life and death. This," she gestured to Eleanor. "Looks like you weren't exaggerating. Who is she?" "This is Eleanor Vance," Jack said. "Eleanor, this is Sarah Jensen. You can trust her." Eleanor just stared, mute. "All right," Sarah said, setting down her briefcase. "Start at the beginning and don't leave anything out." Jack told the story. He was a trained briefer. He laid out the facts with clinical precision. The storm, the lockout, the house in Bel Air, the wheelchair, the picture frame, Thor's alert, and the discovery of the SD card. Sarah listened, her face impassive. She was a lawyer. She heard shocking stories every day. "And what's on the card?" she finally asked. Jack didn't answer. He just looked at her, then at the laptop. "I can't tell you. I have to show you." "Eleanor, is that okay?" Eleanor gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Jack opened the laptop. He turned it toward Sarah. "I suggest," he said, "you watch vid_final and listen to aud_final. They were recorded 2 days before Arthur Vance died." Sarah pulled the laptop closer. Her professionalism was a cold shield. "This is highly irregular, but fine." She hit play. She didn't watch the video. She listened to the audio file first, listening to the waveforms, but she read the transcript of the video as it played. Jack watched her. He had seen men break under pressure. Sarah Jensen was not one of them. As she listened, her face didn't change, but he saw her hand, the one resting on the table, slowly clench into a white-knuckled fist. She listened to Richard and Cynthia plan the overdose. She listened to them discuss the suspicious nurse, Maria. She listened to them plan how to fake the signature. When the audio file ended, she was silent for 10 full seconds. She looked up, not at Jack, but at Eleanor. Her eyes, which had been cool and analytical, now blazed with a controlled, white-hot fury. "The bastards," she whispered. A single word, full of venom. "Sarah," Jack began. "No," she said, holding up a hand. She turned to Eleanor and her voice softened a fraction. "Eleanor, I am so sorry for what I'm about to tell you. This is no longer a family dispute. This isn't about abandonment. This is a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud. And based on this audio, very likely felony murder." Eleanor just looked at her, her eyes blank. The words were too big. Sarah stood up, her energy shifting. She was no longer a visitor. She was in command. "Jack, I need your Wi-Fi password. I need to get online right now." "What are you doing?" "I'm looking for the will, the one they forged." Sarah pulled her own sleek laptop from her briefcase and had it booted in seconds. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with breathtaking speed. She wasn't Googling. She was in a deep, password-protected database, the Hillsborough County Superior Court records. "If they were this brazen, this stupid," she muttered, typing in the names. "Vance, Richard, Vance, Cynthia." The screen refreshed. A list of case files appeared. Sarah stopped typing. Her blood ran cold. "Jack," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "They're not stupid. They're fast." "What is it?" Jack said, moving to stand behind her. She pointed to a new filing, an emergency petition. They filed this yesterday morning, the morning after they threw her out. What is it? Jack repeated. Sarah swiveled in her chair to face them, her face grim. They filed a petition to have Eleanor declared mentally incompetent. They are asking the court to grant them an emergency conservatorship over her person and her entire estate. They're claiming she's senile, a danger to herself, and that she wandered away from home. Eleanor let out a small gasp. They're not just trying to cover their tracks, Jack, Sarah said, her eyes locked on his. They're trying to erase her, and they're going to win. We have the video, Jack said, his voice a low growl. It won't matter, Sarah shot back. Because the emergency hearing, the one to decide if she's competent, is scheduled for 9 a.m. in less than 48 hours. The number 48 hung in the air of Jack's apartment. 48 hours. 2 days to stop a legal freight train that was already at full speed. Eleanor was still pale, her hands trembling, but the blank shock in her eyes was being replaced by a fragile flicker of fear. Incompetent, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. They're saying I'm the crazy one. After what? After what they did? Sarah Jensen did not sugarcoat. She was pacing now, her laptop tucked under one arm, her mind processing at a litigator's speed. Eleanor, that's exactly what they're saying, Sarah said, her voice sharp. And frankly, they have a good case on paper. You're elderly. You left your home in the middle of the night. You are currently with a stranger, a highly trained military operator no less, whom they will paint as a violent, unstable man who has taken you. Jack's jaw tightened. Let them try. They will, Sarah shot back, without malice. And they'll win unless we hit them first and harder. I need to file an emergency counterpetition, an emergency request for a temporary protective order, and a competing petition for conservatorship. Eleanor looked lost. Conservatorship? We need to ask the court to give someone else temporary power over your affairs, Sarah explained. Someone who isn't your children. We need to prove you're in immediate danger. But who? Eleanor's voice was barely audible. I don't have anyone else. Sarah's sharp gaze landed on Jack. Jack didn't flinch. He and Sarah had been in similar high-stakes situations before, just in different kinds of rooms. He understood the unasked question. They'll run a background check on me, Jack said, his voice low. They'll see my profession. They'll see SEAL, and they'll try to use it against me. Yes, they will, Sarah agreed. They'll paint you as a trigger-happy PTSD case. I'll paint you as a disciplined, decorated American hero who rescued a vulnerable citizen. The judge will decide. Jack, I need a conservator. I need a petitioner. I need you. It was a huge ask. It would drag his private, secured life into the messy public swamp of a civil court battle. It would put his career under a microscope. Jack looked at Eleanor, who was watching him, her eyes filled with a desperate, frightened hope. She looked small and frail, a refugee in his living room. He thought of the oath he'd taken to protect against enemies, foreign and domestic. He gave a single, sharp nod. Do it. Whatever you need. Good. Sarah was already typing. I'm filing to have you named as temporary conservator, and I'm attaching evidence. They'll see the video? Jack asked, concerned. No, Sarah said, a thin, wolfish smile touching her lips. I'm filing the SD card as a sealed exhibit. What does that mean? It means it goes directly to the judge and the judge alone for private review. I'll argue the contents are so sensitive and inflammatory that releasing them to the opposing party, Richard and Cynthia, would prejudice the case and potentially endanger the petitioner. By the time their lawyer figures out what's happening, the judge will have already heard them plotting a murder. The hearing in 48 hours. It's not their hearing anymore. It's ours. Sarah closed her briefcase. I'll file this online from my car. Do not leave this apartment. Do not open the door. Your phone, Jack. They have your name. They will find your number. Don't answer any calls you don't recognize. I'll be back tonight. She was gone. The apartment was quiet again, but the air was different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a command post. The counterattack didn't take long. 3 hours later. Jack had made Eleanor a simple lunch, which she was picking at, her appetite gone. Thor was at ease, sleeping at her feet, a warm, reassuring weight. Jack's personal cell phone vibrated. The caller ID was restricted, but the number was a familiar prefix from the naval base. He frowned. He stepped out onto the balcony, sliding the glass door shut behind him. He answered, Callahan. Jack, it's Thorne. Jack's posture straightened as if he were at attention. Commander Thorne was his commanding officer. He was a man carved from granite, a career operator who had forgotten more about warfare than most men ever knew. He was fair, but he was hard. "Sir," Jack said. "Is everything all right?" "That's what I'm calling to ask you, Callahan." Thorne's voice was low, and it was not happy. "I just spent 10 minutes on the phone with a very hysterical woman named Cynthia Vance. She told me a wild story. She says her elderly mother is senile, that you have a history of PTSD, and that you have abducted her from her home. She used the word kidnapped. She also threatened to call the press and the mayor's office." Jack's blood ran cold, but his voice remained calm. "Sir, that is not what happened." "I know," Thorne said, cutting him off. "I know you, Callahan. You're the sanest man in my command. But what I also know is that a civilian is making serious allegations against one of my operators. This has the smell of a media circus," he added. "I've put the base legal team on standby, but I'm asking you, operator to operator, what the hell is going on? Are you in trouble?" Jack took a deep breath. "Sir, it's complicated. The woman, Eleanor Vance, I found her on the street during the storm. She had been put out of her home by her children. I brought her here for her own safety. I believe her children are involved in criminal activity." There was a long pause on the line. Thorne was processing this. "This is not a SEAL operation, Callahan," Thorne said finally, his voice sharp. "This is not a rescue mission. You are on leave." "Yes, sir, but I couldn't just leave her there to die." "No," Thorne conceded, his voice softening slightly. "No, I suppose you couldn't. Listen to me. You are a liability now. Your name is attached to this. Be smart. Stay detached. Let your lawyer handle it. And for God's sake, keep your nose clean. This Cynthia woman, she sounds like a grenade with the pin pulled." "Understood, sir," Jack said. "Good. Don't make me regret backing you up." Thorne out. The line went dead. Jack stood on the balcony, the Florida sunshine suddenly feeling cold. The pressure had just escalated. Cynthia wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting dirty. He went back inside. Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes searching. Is something wrong?" "Everything's fine, Eleanor," he lied, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Just work." He looked at her, cooped up in the small apartment, pale with fear. His commander's words echoed in his head. Stay detached. But he was also a medic. He knew sunshine and fresh air were as important as medicine. "You know what?" he said, making a decision. "We've been inside enough. Let's get some air. We'll go to the Riverwalk. It's quiet this time of day. Just a short walk." Eleanor looked horrified. "Go out. I'm with you. Thor is with you. Nobody can touch you. I promise." Half an hour later, they were rolling slowly along the wide, sun-drenched esplanade of the Tampa Riverwalk. The air was fresh, washed clean by the storm. The modern architecture of the museums gleamed in the afternoon sun. Eleanor, wrapped in a warm blanket, her face turned up to the sun, almost looked relaxed. Thor trotted beside the wheelchair, his head high, enjoying the walk. It was perfect until it wasn't. "Mother, mother." The voice was sharp, desperate. Jack stopped the wheelchair, his hand instinctively going to his back, where there was nothing but an empty belt. Richard Vance was walking quickly toward them from the parking lot. He was not the irritated man in pajamas from the storm. He was a man in a rumpled suit, his face red and sweating. He looked panicked. "Mother, thank God. This man. Get away from her." Jack stepped in front of the wheelchair, putting his body between Richard and Eleanor. "You need to back up," Jack said, his voice even, low, and dangerous. "You are not to come near her. You can't tell me what to do." "That's my mother," Richard yelled, his eyes wild. He had clearly just spoken to his lawyer. He knew he was in trouble. "Mother, we have to go. He's lying to you." He lunged. It was a clumsy, foolish move born of desperation. He wasn't trying to hit Jack. He was trying to grab the handles of the wheelchair. He never made it. Jack didn't move. He didn't have to. Thor, who had been at a perfect heel, exploded into action. But it wasn't an attack. He didn't bark. He didn't leap. He didn't bite. He simply moved. A blur of 90 pounds of trained muscle and became a wall. In a single, fluid motion, he placed himself directly in Richard's path, between his hands and the wheelchair, and then he growled. It was not the growl of a normal dog. It was a deep, rumbling vibration that seemed to come from the center of the earth, a sound that promised terrible, efficient violence. The hackles on his back stood up, his lips pulling back just enough to show a flash of white, powerful teeth. Richard Vance froze. He was face to face with a creature that was the complete antithesis of his own soft, spoiled life. He was staring at a trained weapon, and he knew it.
He stammered, backing away, his hands held up.
Jack hadn't moved an inch. He just stared at Richard, his eyes as cold as the bottom of the ocean. I said, "Back up." Richard scrambled, turned, and practically ran back toward the parking lot. Eleanor, who had flinched, let out a shaky breath. Her hand went down, and trembling, found the thick fur on Thor's head. "Good. Good boy," she whispered. Jack looked down at his dog, who was calm again, his tail giving a single happy thump at Eleanor's praise. He looked back at the retreating coward. The first shot had been fired, and they had held the line. The ride back from the Riverwalk was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. The air in the truck was thick with adrenaline and a new, sharp tension. Richard's panicked retreat was a victory, but it was a messy one. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Thor was in the back, panting happily, his job done. Eleanor, however, seemed to have changed. The frail, frightened woman who had left the apartment was gone. In her place was a woman who had just watched her enemy run. A small, hard spark was back in her eyes. "He was always a coward," she said, her voice small but clear, breaking the silence. "He gets it from his father." "No, that's not right. His father, Arthur, was a brave man. Richard, he's just weak." Jack glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Weak men are dangerous, Eleanor. They're unpredictable." They returned to the apartment, to the command post, to find Sarah Jensen waiting for them in the lobby. She must have been tracking his phone because she met them as the elevator doors opened. Her face was a mask of controlled urgency. "I got the notification from the court," she said, skipping any greetings. "Our petition was filed. Theirs has a problem." "What happened?" Jack asked, wheeling Eleanor into the apartment. "The judge," Sarah said. "A Judge Patricia Allen, she's a tough, ex-prosecutor, has reviewed our petition. She's seen the sealed filing, but she didn't grant our protective order. Not yet. She's consolidated the hearings, it's all going to happen in one shot in the morning." "Is that good or bad?" Jack asked. "It's terrible," Sarah said flatly. "It means she's not convinced. It means she's looking at a grieving son and daughter and a stranger who has their mother. The video, it's shocking, yes, but their lawyer will say it's out of context. They'll say Arthur was on heavy end-of-life pain medication, that he was delusional. They'll say the kids were just handling a difficult situation, and they will say, your PTSD is clouding your judgment." Eleanor, who had been listening, spoke up, "But they killed him." Sarah knelt in front of the wheelchair, her gaze softening for the first time. "Eleanor, I know it, you know it, and Jack knows it, but a judge doesn't. She has doubts. We need more than a video. We need someone to corroborate it. We need an expert, a medical professional." Jack's eyes met Sarah's. They both said the name at the same time. "Maria, the nurse from the audio file," Sarah said, nodding. "The one Cynthia was afraid of. The one who was suspicious. They fired her," Eleanor said, her voice sharp with the memory. "Cynthia told me she was caught stealing." "Good Lord, she wasn't stealing, was she?" "No," Jack said. "She was asking questions." Sarah was on her feet, her purpose clear. "I need to find her. A nurse, Maria. What was her last name?" "Sanchez," Eleanor said instantly. "Maria Sanchez, she was so kind. She always smelled a little bit like cinnamon." It was all Sarah needed. She was at her own laptop again. Maria Sanchez, nursing license, Tampa. For 10 minutes, the only sound was her furious typing. "She's not listed with the agency that placed her with you anymore," Sarah muttered. Cynthia made good on her threat. "She's been blacklisted from the high-end private care services." "So, she's gone?" Jack asked. "No," Sarah said, a thin smile on her lips. "She's just somewhere else. She found her. She's working right now. A double shift at the Shady Palms Continuing Care Facility in Brandon. A nursing home," Jack said. "A definite step down from private, high-paying clients in Bel Air." "We have to go," Eleanor said, pushing herself up slightly in her chair. "Slow down," Jack said. "Eleanor, no. It's not safe." "I'll go, Sarah and I." "No," Eleanor said, and her voice had a new steel authority Jack had never heard. "You won't get her to talk. She's afraid of people like Cynthia. She'll see Sarah in her expensive suit and see another boss. She'll see you, a big, strong man, and she'll be intimidated. But she knows me. She trusts me. I am not a vulnerable citizen anymore, Sarah. I am a witness, and I'm going to get our other witness. Jack and Sarah looked at each other. Sarah was the first to concede. She saw the logic. She's right, Sarah said. It's a risk, but she's our best shot. An hour later, they were in Brandon, outside a facility that was the polar opposite of the Bel Air mansion. Shady Palms was clean, but it smelled of antiseptic and boiled vegetables. It was a place of function, not of comfort. They found Maria Sanchez in the staff break room, a small, windowless room with a flickering fluorescent light. She was a woman in her early 50s, her dark hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a bun. Her scrubs were a pale blue, and her eyes, when she looked up, were the kindest, most tired eyes Jack had ever seen. She was eating yogurt out of a container when they walked in. She saw Sarah in her blazer, and Jack, imposing and silent, and her face immediately tensed. She looked like a mouse who had just seen the shadow of a hawk. Can I help you? This is a staff-only area. Then Jack stepped aside, revealing Eleanor in the wheelchair. Maria's hand, holding the plastic spoon, froze halfway to her mouth. The spoon clattered onto the table. Oh, she breathed. Oh, my God, Maria, Eleanor said, her voice gentle. The nurse's professionalism crumbled, her eyes filling with tears. She rushed over and knelt by the wheelchair, taking Eleanor's hands in hers. Mrs. Vance. My God, what? What are you doing here?
I thought they said you were?
That you weren't well. They lied, Maria, Eleanor said softly. They lied about me and they lied about you. Maria's face crumpled.
I lost my job at the agency, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks.
Cynthia, she told them I was unprofessional, that I stole. I've been a nurse for 30 years. I have never had a single complaint. Now I'm here working doubles just to make the mortgage. Maria, Sarah said, stepping forward gently. We know what happened. We have proof. Proof? Maria looked up, horrified. They did it to him, didn't they? Eleanor asked, her voice low. The medicine. You suspected. Maria closed her eyes as if in pain. Yes, she admitted, her voice trembling. Yes, she kept insisting I increase the pain medication, the morphine. I told her it was against the doctor's orders, that his levels were fine. She said she would take care of it herself if I didn't. Then I was fired. We need you to tell a judge what you just told us, Sarah said. Maria recoiled as if struck. A judge? No, you don't understand. She will ruin me. She'll go to the nursing board. I'll lose my license. I can't fight them. Maria, look at me, Eleanor pleaded. They put me out in a hurricane. They left me on the sidewalk. This is what they do. If you don't speak up, they will win. Maria was sobbing, torn between her fear and her conscience.
I want to, but I
have a family. It was at that moment that her cell phone, sitting on the break room table, began to vibrate. It buzzed a harsh, angry sound on the cheap laminate. They all froze. The screen lit up, the caller ID was clear. Cynthia Vance. Maria let out a small, horrified gasp. She's calling me. Don't answer it, Jack said, his voice low. The phone kept buzzing. Maria stared at it, mesmerized as if it were a snake. Finally, it stopped. The room was silent. A second later, the phone pinged. A new voicemail. She knows, Maria whispered, her face pale. She must know I'm talking to someone. Play it, Sarah said, her voice hard. On speaker. Maria's hands were shaking. She fumbled with the phone, her thumb tapping at the screen. Cynthia's voice, cold, condescending, and sickeningly sweet, filled the small break room. Hi, Maria. It's Cynthia Vance. Just checking in. You know, I was so disappointed to hear you were no longer with the agency. Such a shame. I was just thinking, I hear you're working over at Shady Palms. I have a lot of friends on the boards of these facilities, you know. I just wanted to remind you that we are still a very important family and it would be a very, very unfortunate thing if word got out about how unreliable you were in my father's final days. You keep quiet. You stay out of this. And maybe you get to keep this job. Okay. Talk soon. The message ended. The four of them sat in the flickering fluorescent light. The threat was not vague. It was a direct, calculated strike. Maria Sanchez, who had been crying, slowly stopped. She wiped her nose on the back of her hand. She looked at the phone, her palpable fear hardening into something else, something solid. She looked at Sarah. She looked at Jack. Then her eyes settled on Eleanor. She took a deep breath. She stood up, her back straight. "She is not going to silence me," Maria said, her voice low and steady. "She is not going to take my dignity.
I will testify.
I will tell them exactly what I saw." The hallway of the Hillsborough County Superior Courthouse was a long, sterile canyon of beige marble. The air smelled of floor wax and old paper. It was 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the hearing. Jack, Sarah, Eleanor, and Maria Sanchez sat on a hard wooden bench. Jack was not a suit man. He wore a dark gray polo shirt and black tactical pants, the closest to formal wear he could manage. He was an immovable object, solid and calm, with Thor sitting faithfully at his feet. Thor was wearing a service animal vest, and his presence, while technically for support, was an undeniable statement of protection. Eleanor was a different woman. Sarah had brought her a simple, dignified blue knit suit. Her gray hair was brushed, and her eyes, though frightened, were clear and steady. She was no longer a victim. She was a witness. Maria Sanchez sat beside her, clutching her purse, her knuckles white. She was terrified, but she was present. A man and two others swept down the hall. Jack recognized Richard and Cynthia. They were not the panicked, angry people from the park or the storm. They had been transformed. Richard wore a somber navy suit, his face composed in an expression of deep, tragic concern. Cynthia wore a conservative black dress, her hair in a chignon, a single strand of pearls at her throat. She looked like a grieving daughter. Between them, leading the way, was their lawyer. He was a man in his 50s named Mr. Kenzie, and he was expensive. His suit was Italian silk, his watch was gold, and his skin was tan and smooth. He radiated the confidence that comes from a lifetime of billing by the hour and winning. He glanced at their small group, his eyes flicking over Jack and Thor with open disdain before he gave Sarah a predator's smile. "Ms. Jensen," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "A long way from the JAG Corps, aren't we? This is a family matter. You're out of your depth." Sarah Jensen, who was 5 inches shorter and had 10 times the steel, didn't even blink. "Mr. Kenzie, save the performance for the judge. You're going to need it." Kenzie's smile faltered for a second before he led his clients into courtroom 3. At 9:00 a.m., they all rose. "All rise," the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge Patricia Allen presiding. Judge Allen entered. She was a woman in her late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and gray hair in a tight bun. She was ex-military and an ex-prosecutor, and she had a reputation for not suffering fools. She sat, looked over the crowded courtroom, and her gaze was a physical weight. "This is the matter of the Vance estate," Judge Allen said, her voice like gravel. "I have 2 competing emergency petitions. One from Mr. Richard Vance and Ms. Cynthia Vance for conservatorship of their mother, Eleanor, and one from Mr. Jack Callahan for a temporary protective order against them. I have read the initial filings. I have reviewed the sealed evidence. Mr. Kenzie, as your clients filed first, you may begin. Be brief. I have a full docket." Kenzie rose, a picture of polished sympathy. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a tragedy, a simple family tragedy." He began to paint a masterful picture. He described Richard and Cynthia as 2 loving children, devastated by the loss of their father, Arthur. He described their mother, Eleanor, as a woman they adored, but who was slipping into the fog of dementia. "She is confused, Your Honor," Kenzie said, his voice dripping with false sorrow. "She is paranoid. She wanders, and in her confusion, she has been taken." His tone shifted. He turned his gaze on Jack. "She has fallen under the influence of this man." He pointed. Mr. Jack Callahan, a man with no relation, no connection, and a very, very disturbing background. This was the main attack. "We have records that Mr. Callahan is a Navy SEAL, a man trained in violence, a man trained to handle situations. We have been informed by his own command that he is on mandatory leave, which we all know is military parlance for psychological instability. He is suffering from PTSD. He is an unstable, battle-crazed operator who has, for reasons we can only assume are financial, absconded with a vulnerable, confused woman." He painted Jack as a fortune hunter, a cuckoo in the nest, manipulating a frail old woman to get his hands on the Gable family's millions. "We are only trying to protect our mother, Your Honor, from him." He sat down. The implication was heavy and ugly. Judge Allen's face was unreadable. She simply made a note. "Ms. Jensen, your response." Sarah stood. She was not an actress. She was a surgeon. "Thank you, Your Honor." What Mr. Kenzie calls dementia, we call desperation. What he calls instability, we call heroism. And what he calls a family tragedy is, in fact, a criminal conspiracy. Kenzie leapt to his feet. Objection. Inflammatory. Sit down, Mr. Kenzie, the judge snapped, her voice sharp. You had your turn. Let her speak. Continue, Ms. Jensen. Sarah nodded. Mr. Kenzie is right about one thing. Mr. Callahan is a Navy SEAL. He is a man who runs toward danger, not away from it. When he found Eleanor Vance, not wandering, but put out of her home in a hurricane, in her nightgown, with her wheelchair, he did what he was trained to do. He protected a noncombatant. He protected an American citizen in distress. She then moved, point by point. There is no dementia. We have a medical evaluation which I am submitting. Eleanor Vance is lucid. She is aware, and she is terrified. As for the estate, Mr. Callahan has filed a binding affidavit stating that he will accept no funds, no property, and no payment for his actions. His only concern is for Mrs. Vance's safety. Sarah then turned to the events surrounding Arthur Vance's death. I call my first witness, Nurse Maria Sanchez. Maria walked to the stand, her hands shaking. She was sworn in. Sarah gently guided her. Nurse Sanchez, you were Mr. Arthur Vance's private nurse. Yes, Maria said, her voice small. And you were fired. Why? Objection, Kenzie yelled. Relevance. Entirely relevant, Your Honor, Sarah said. It speaks to a pattern of intimidation. Overruled, the judge said. Answer the question, nurse. Maria took a deep breath. I was fired because I questioned Ms. Cynthia Vance. She kept insisting I increase Mr. Vance's morphine dosage far beyond the doctor's orders. She called them comfort meds. I told her it was dangerous. She told me to do it or she would take care of it herself. The next day, I was fired for theft. The courtroom was silent. Kenzie's face had lost its smooth tan. And did Ms. Vance have any contact with you after you were fired? Sarah asked. Yes, Maria said. Yesterday, she left me a voicemail. She threatened me. She said she would make sure I lost my nursing license if I spoke to anyone. Your Honor, Sarah said, I have that voicemail which we have submitted as evidence. Judge Allen looked at Cynthia Vance, whose face was now as white as her pearls. Kenzie attempted a desperate cross-examination, attacking Maria as a disgruntled employee, but Maria's simple, frightened truth held firm. I am here, she said, because they are bad people and they hurt a good man. She was excused. Kenzie looked shaken. Sarah Jensen rose for her final point. Your Honor, she said, her voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. The petitioner, Eleanor Vance, has one final piece of evidence. It is an audio and video file provided to the court as a sealed exhibit. Kenzie, who had no knowledge of a sealed filing, stiffened. Your Honor, I must object. We have not seen this so-called. You're objecting to evidence your own clients created, Mr. Kenzie? Sarah asked, her voice ice. Your Honor, Sarah continued, addressing the judge. We now ask that this evidence, recorded by Arthur Vance himself in his final days, be played for the record. Judge Allen, who had already reviewed it in private, looked at Richard and Cynthia. Objection overruled. The court will hear audio file _final. The bailiff pressed a button. The sound system kicked on, and the courtroom went deathly silent. They heard the whispers. Cynthia, is he asleep? Richard, he's drugged. It's fine. Cynthia, we have to do this now. That goody two-shoes Maria was getting suspicious. Richard, just up the pain meds. The ones in the vial. The hospice nurse will just think he's being made comfortable. Cynthia, fine. I have the papers here. He just needs to make a mark. We can help him. A collective gasp went through the room. Richard Vance looked green. Cynthia looked like she was going to faint. Mr. Kenzie was staring at his clients, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He had been lied to. Before Kenzie could say a word, Judge Patricia Allen brought her gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. Bang! That is enough, she roared, her voice trembling with righteous fury. The kindly grandmother was gone, replaced by the prosecutor. The petition for conservatorship by Richard Vance and Cynthia Vance is denied with extreme prejudice. Bang! The petition for a permanent restraining order protecting Mrs. Eleanor Vance from her children is granted. Effective immediately to a distance of 100 yards. Bang! The petition for temporary conservatorship over the person and property of Mrs. Eleanor Vance by the petitioner Jack Callahan is granted pending a full review. Bang! Richard and Cynthia were frozen like statues. And finally, Judge Allen said, her voice now dangerously quiet. This court is sealing these proceedings. I am ordering the court clerk to provide a full, unedited transcript. This transcript, along with the original SD card, the audio files, the video files, and the testimony of Nurse Sanchez, are to be delivered immediately to the office of the Hillsborough County District Attorney for a full criminal investigation into the death of Arthur Vance. Bang, she stood. Bailiff, escort Mr. and Mrs. Vance from the courtroom. They are not to approach their mother. Court is adjourned. The judge swept from the room. Richard and Cynthia stood in shock, unable to move as a bailiff approached them. Eleanor, in her wheelchair, finally let go. She bent over, her body racked with silent, relieved sobs. Jack, who had stood motionless the entire time, moved. He knelt in front of her wheelchair, ignoring the lawyers, the court staff, the world. He placed his large, calloused hand gently on her shoulder. Thor, sensing the shift, crept forward and rested his head on her knee. Eleanor reached out, her trembling hands finding Jack's shoulder and Thor's head. She wasn't alone anymore. She had her family.